DC Comics have a big event going on. It's caused a little confusion. I don't know really what to make of Dark Crisis so far, but now we're getting the tie-ins in The Flash 783 as well as Dark Crisis Young Justice. And here to talk about the success or failure of Dark Crisis so far with these comic books is my good friend Josh. How you doing, Josh?
I am doing well, Wes. I'm in Dark Crisis mode, but not in a Dark Crisis, I guess you could say. But yeah, I'm ready to talk about these. One I thought was okay, and one I just, I'm okay if someone like pees on it or sets it on fire.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a tale of two different comic books. But what's weird is they're essentially doing the exact same story.
Yes.
One of them is relatively successful and one of them is not successful. If you've been following the channel, I bet you're not surprised to know that The Flash 783 is a much better comic book than Dark Crisis Young Justice. We'll talk about the good comic book or the better comic book first. I have issues with this as well.
Agreed.
The Flash 783, Jeremy Adams, Amankai Nahupan is the artist on there. I hope I didn't butcher that too bad.
Hey, it's way better than I would have done, so I give you all the credit in the world.
I don't think a lot of people coming into this knew that Barry Allen was missing, but that is the crux of this story. We got the Dark Crisis. Barry Allen's missing. We need to bring him back and get him back on this new Justice League that's going to form and try to save the old Justice League. And somehow Mr. Terrific, along the way, has developed a portal and has the signature of Barry Allen. There are multiple Barry Allens out there, and they have to find their Barry Allen. There appears to be 3 different signatures, and they need to go to 3 different locations through this Speed Force portal to go out there. Obviously, Wally West is going to go in there. They got Max Mercury. They got Kid Flash. They got Jesse Quick. They got all the Flash family members that are available to them. We do see Wally's better half come in with the kids, Jai and Iris. And we do get a moment where Linda's about to tell Wally that she has also developed Speed Force powers because he does not know that. But the kids escape into the Speed Force zone before the adults, and the calamity has begun.
I will give it credit because it actually feels relevant to the story, unlike what DC tends to do, where they have these side stories that they just like, we should have a tie-in, so let's just kind of make this random crap happen. Like, this has been kind of inherently ingrained into the story for a while now that Barry's missing and we need to find him. This isn't the first time we're hearing about it, so they at least laid a foundation for this, and it makes sense. So I will give it credit for that.
Oh, I take umbrage with what you just said making sense.
Okay.
Because this is the follow-up plan. There's 3 distinct locations where their Barry could be. Yeah. Obviously, the kids are going to one of them. There's 4 adults to go into the portal. They separate into 2 teams and go to 2 locations instead of going to 3 locations to find the kids. At this point, I assume that Jai and Iris are like the priority here. We need to save the kids before they get murdered or something. So they only send two teams, and they all end up in different locations with different pairings.
But so maybe I misread it, but I thought that the whole thing was that the wristbands were preset to take them somewhere, and that the kids ended up taking the wristband.
No, the wristbands are preset to bring you back if you hit the button.
I thought they were. I mean, I get that. I knew that, but I thought they
the
also
wristbands to go to wherever the kids were. They should have went to 3 different locations instead of 2.
Yeah, I agreed. Someone, if they could go after the kids, they definitely should have gone after the kids.
Because the kids, they end up in this nightmare world. Apparently, Barry Allen is this big billionaire, and everything's Allen tech. And we do see the first appearance of a new character. I guess this will be a hot ticket item. Maybe it's a speculator piece where we see the Night Flash kind of sneaking up behind them.
It was very much like we've already had What If Batman Was Flash, and this was very much like What If Flash Was Batman. Am I interested? No, not really, but whatever. I'll read it. It should be fine. I trust Jeremy Adams. And I think one of the comments I made to you is like, it's not the best thing ever, but it's not bad. It's okay. And hey, Jeremy Adams is making the most of what he has. But yes, them not going after the kids, especially if they had a choice, is a really bad call. And I think I was trying to convince myself they couldn't go after the kids.
The other hero team up that ends up in a location without our Barry Allen ends up being Max Mercury and Jesse Quick. They appear to end up in the movie The Road Warrior, or Mad Max, whatever you want to call it. And there's this version of Barry Allen in a car that is trying to outrun a bunch of people like on this weird desert highway.
I kind of chuckled at the similarities there between Mad Max and this. And also, if you look really close, you don't get a close-up of Barry in this. He's driving his car. But if you look closely, it looks like he's got this like monster stash going on. So I'm mostly excited to see what he looks like here. But other than that, I was like, okay, this is pointless but fun. So we'll go there.
And then we do see where the real Barry Allen is. This was revealed in the solicitation for September 2022. There's this happiness multiverse where Barry is set, and it's basically the best world he could ever be in. It's him and Kid Flash. They're fighting Captain Cold, and he's got Iris West, and they're in love, and it's the best world he could ever imagine being in, and I guess that's where he is. And I believe, from what I understand from the solicitations, this is where actually all the other members of the Justice League are. They're in this weird happiness multiverse.
I liked how they did this too, because when you start reading it, it's very like Golden Age comics. It's got that same vibe and feel to it. Adams executed it incredibly well, that it leaned into that nostalgia without being overly cheesy or overly hokey. I mean, it's pretty on point. So I give him credit. Yes, and I agree. It does seem like this is where the rest of the Justice League is. I'm curious to see what the fallout is, or exactly what this Earth or this universe, or whatever it is, how it's playing out. Because it kind of reminds me of like Black Mercy and how it makes you think, you're in your ideal state. So it seems a little repetitive in that sense, but I'm not excited about how they bring the Justice League back. I think it's going to feel like been there, done that. But I enjoyed seeing Barry in this element. It was a nice throwback to old school comics.
And Wally West and Kid Flash are the ones that ended up with the multiverse that was the real Barry Allen. So apparently they can see it and traverse to this multiverse. Obviously, the adventure just got a little bit bigger. They do need to go find Giant Iris. And I imagine they're going to have to go and rescue Max Mercury and Jesse Quick. And I do believe Barry Allen will refuse to leave.
This world that he's in, this happiness world, is the reason I said it's going to feel been there, done that, is he's going to be so ingrained into this feeling that he's not going to want to let go of it. And then something will eventually happen that he will. We've seen the story done a million times. I think that's why I'm not overly excited about everything, but it was executed well, that I enjoyed it.
My biggest problem with the execution of this comic book is it's not a complete story. It's not even close. This is like a free comic book day comic.
Yeah.
You get introduced to the idea of what's happening. There are a few stakes introduced, and then the comic book is over. For some reason, modern writers think that a comic book is an introduction of an idea with a cliffhanger. That is not a comic book.
No.
And that was my biggest problem with this, because, oh, wow, things got interesting. Let's end it. And it's like a 3-minute read. It's one of the fastest comic books to read this week.
I think the one thing too that I'm hung up on is we've talked about this whole idea of writing for the trade, and it almost feels like that. It's like, okay, we're going to continue this elsewhere. So again, let's end on a cliffhanger. And while you do get some sense of a pull to like find out what happens next, or to come back next month, it also feels incomplete. And this is something that writers don't seem to grasp today. Is before you could write a long form story, but within each individual issue, you had, what could be classified as an individual arc for that issue. And we don't get that here at all. It definitely just blatantly ends, and then it's like, until next time.
I came away unsatisfied, although I will recommend it because there is quality there. The art's fine. The writing's pretty good, but it's not a full comic book.
No, not at all. And in the back of my mind, I just keep thinking, so when does Linda race in to save the day and reveal that she has powers? Because we all know that's how it's going to end. We know it's coming.
Definitely, she's going to have to go in there. Those are her kids, so I imagine that's going to happen. There is a very similar story that's unfolding also within Dark Crisis, called Dark Crisis Young Justice #1. Meghan Fitzmartin, I don't know why DC Comics seems to think that she is a quality writer. They give her the Tim Drake stuff, and now she's getting this Young Justice story. Laura Braga on art, and right away you can see the difference between a good comic book writer like Josh Williamson and a bad comic book writer like Meghan Fitzmartin. You get the same exact scene as Dark Crisis #1. We're at the funeral. You can see the emotions on people's faces. In Josh Williamson's, you might get a couple of lines of dialogue to highlight the emotion that's going on. In Meghan Fitzmartin's comic book, it's wall-to-wall dialogue, ruining the art and not trusting the artist that they can portray the emotion that's supposed to be coming through the artwork.
You can clearly tell that Fitzmartin has no trust in the artist being able to convey what they need to convey. And then she actually makes it worse, because the dialogue here comes off so CW and
it's bad,
angsty and teen, and like, oh, they died, and now we're back together, but do we want to be back together? It was just, it's way too much. And I remember opening this book and reading the first page and being like, oh dear God, this is what we're in tune for, and for another 20 pages.
And it's written basically from the perspective of Cassie Sandsmark and how she feels about it. And she comes off as like one of the worst characters in DC Comics. She comes off as a villain. She hates her friends. She runs down Tim Drake. She runs down Connor Kent. And she really runs down Bart Allen, just like trashing his character and whatnot. And you see her, and I guess her name is Arrowette, who had been away and has come back. Yeah, and she comes off as a weird character too, and they're kind of arguing or whatever. And at one point, Cassie Sandsmark said, "I wish they had all just stayed dead." And I was like, "Yeah, how am I supposed to root for this character?" Yes, she does kind of feel bad about it later on, but this isn't a 10-year-old character. She's like 17.
I feel like there's pretty much character assassination all around, but Cassie definitely gets the brunt of it because the story is told from her perspective. It's her point of view. And it's like you get it on the first page because she complains about people commenting on Wonder Woman being a mentor of hers. And she's like, she wasn't a mentor. She's someone that guided me and taught me. And I'm like, that's a fucking mentor, you dumbass. But then, she complains about that. Then she talks about how, these deaths brought pretty much the Young Justice team back together and how they haven't spoken in years. And what you said, she wishes some of them would have stayed dead because it would have been easier. And I'm like, this is not a hero. Like this, and this is the problem with comics. These comic writers today don't know how to write heroes. It's fine if you have conflict, but if you've had that life and you shared those experiences together, you're not then gonna be like, oh, I wish they would have stayed dead. You're gonna be happy that they're alive. So for me, that was super weird. And I can't remember if it was Cassie or Sissy that said it, but one of them had a weird line about like, oh, they're over here grieving over their fake dads. And I'm like, what?
Awful.
Like,
just
dude,
terrible.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
And then they just disappear. And they're in the Hall of Justice, but nobody knows how they disappeared. I'm going, this is the Hall of Justice. They have surveillance equipment. Could we at least put them somewhere where you wouldn't be able to just play it right back? But the one thing is, besides that, which they don't go to the surveillance equipment, we have seen heroes just disappear out of thin air recently, and they all died. The fact that John Kent and Dick Grayson and Wally West don't care that Bart Allen, Connor Kent, and Tim Drake have just disappeared just like the heroes that are dead, and they don't even want to find out.
No care, no interest. Like even I think Wally even says something to Cassie like, "We don't have time for teen angst," and I'm like, "What?" Because in the Flash, it's brought up that hey, Bart's missing, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm not sure where he is," but it's presented in a way of like we're already in the middle of this, and here it's like, "Don't bother me, child. Go away with your kitty." Your kitty problems. You're expecting us to believe these heroes aren't going to care. And it's also written incredibly inconsistently that, these three heroes disappear. Cassie's concerned. And at first Sissy's concerned. And then later Sissy isn't concerned and is like, they're probably off, trying to deal with the loss of their mentors, their fake dads. I think that's when the fake dads comment comes in. You also saw them just randomly disappear. It's not like they're like, hey, we're going to go. And then you haven't seen them for a while. Like they disappeared out of thin air, like bloop, they're gone. What's going on here? But we do find out what's going on with them. And it's very similar to what's happening in Flash. Tim Drake wakes up, Alfred's alive, and he's going to help him out. And, Connor Kent wakes up in another universe and Bart wakes up in another universe. But then they all of a sudden they're in the same room together. And I'm going, okay. It's weird. Like it does not flow well. The transitions are terrible, and it's strange. There's so many. I keep coming back to Meghan Fitzmartin doesn't understand these characters or their history, and I feel like this book proves it. But yeah, it sets it up as if they each wake up in different universes, but then they are together. There is a semi-interesting element that wherever they are, it's pretty much the time that Superman died. And they can't find stories or history past that point. So they're basically at that point of time. So whether it's a different universe or just there's a time jump here, I'll be curious to see. Curious is the wrong word. I don't even want to say interesting. I just want to know, what is this? And I should probably not even want to know that because it's probably not going to get answered. Cassie's like, I'm going to go help them. And then the last page is her stepping on this villain's head while the other heroes are behind her. I'm like, she saved him already? Yeah. She's not even like, oh, I'm going to go help them. It's more like, I'm going to try to find them. And she feels bad about what she says, which thank God she should feel bad about what she said to them. But then on this other universe, you've got a Superboy, Connor, who's like, don't worry, help's on the way. How does he know? He just says it. There's no sign or reason for him to say it. He just says it. And then the next thing you see is Cassie like standing victorious.
So that's a different version of Cassie.
I don't know. Like I'm assuming she got teleported because they all teleported.
I have no idea what F is like. It is a garbage comic. I do not recommend this, and I will not be reading the rest of this miniseries. We talked about it more than it deserved, but it's just a bad story with terrible dialogue. It's nonsensical, and it's basically a replay of what's going on in Flash, which was executed at a much higher level. Listen, I don't know Meghan Fitzmartin. I imagine she's a nice person. She's just not a superhero comic book writer, and there's nothing else to it.
I'm not sure if I would consider her a good writer in general, but definitely not superhero comics. And by the way, Meghan Fitzmartin, since you're writing Tim Drake, Alfred never called him Master Drake. He called him Master Timothy. Get it right.
The Dark Crisis event is off to an interesting start, I guess. I think there's a lot of confusion about what it's supposed to be. They've basically rebranded it 3 or 4 times now. I kind of talked about that with my good friend Gabe Hernandez about the confusion that they're causing within the event itself. Very little, if anything, exciting has happened so far. It's kind of hard to see people really sticking this one out. It's been weird.